So Steve, you'll have to unmute the one that says SC 102. If you scroll over and ask it to unmute, say, ask to unmute on SC 102, then there'll be a pop-up.
Aurora?
Yes.
Aurora, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Just a second.
Okay, we're on live stream. So we're gonna host.
You want to make me host and I'll rename the judge?
I need to change this one real quick.
What do we need to do? So Aurora, can you give me that, the session code that you need?
Are you ready?
Is it TQMX1?
No.
No? Okay, just a second. Okay,
It's U, V as in
U.
Victor.
wait, say
4,
that again.
starting over. U, V as in Victor.
Oh, V, okay, just a second. Okay,
4,
here,
F as in Frank.
got it.
H, M as in mother.
Okay.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I'm gonna get this up and going.
You're up here, you're here.
You want to make me the host or doesn't really matter.
Tell her I don't need to.
You don't need to.
Okay. I would just relabel the bench is all.
That's fine.
It's fine. I can hear you.
Right here. Yeah, I want him to be able to see it. Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, we just put this. Yeah. Like that. Before you plug it in.
Okay.
So,
I am.
It's
It's gonna take me a few minutes.
It's
I
gonna
just
be
want to
the judge
find
can
it,
see it.
instead of like go through the rest.
That's it, that's Symphony.
This is,
See it up here from there,
that's the
well,
code here. That helps you. I gotta go just.
No, you're awesome. No, it's only been- so, you-
So I don't know if that number helps you, but you should go and search it by that.
Awesome, thank you, you're awesome.
Okay. And I'm gonna go put all of it. Actually, Aurora, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Does this thing go
Aurora,
higher
I'm gonna make you the
now?
I'm gonna make you the host, and then I'm gonna go back to my office if you can speak with me to the host once you see me.
Okay.
Okay. Good, and if that doesn't work, let me know, if I need to post it to the.
Maybe I should stay here then.
Maybe.
Yeah, then you come.
Okay, I'll work on
But then you need,
How's that?
Change it and see the vote. Or you wanna use my laptop?
it's not private, so hold on.
Yeah, maybe flip it into your
I'm gonna go
laptop.
post it on the
Can I
internet.
open that?
Just give me 1 second.
Oh, yeah, it leans a little bit forward.
Yeah. For sure.
Counsel in the courtroom,
Yes.
the court reporter, can you tell me who will be presenting argument for the state?
Eric Newman.
Thank you.
Eric with a C, Newman with a W.
Thank you.
Sit on my desk, so we don't even have to worry about.
I'm going back to that. I have it in my office here.
Yeah. You got something better at your place?
My house has. When I was in my apartment, all I did was put it in the school, because I never planned.
Yeah. Right, Eric, it looks good. Yeah.
Yeah.
For a desk.
Uh,
Because it's like good ergonomics.
Oh, yeah.
Chair. Kind of like how you work in the kitchen.
What it did earlier.
Oh, I don't think. Thanks.
Sure. That should not be showing.
So it's in presenter view.
Yeah, you just-
So,
This is the PowerPoint where we
there you go.
have. Used it.
That's the laser pointer.
The laser pointer. Thank you.
Well, it is both, but what you were just
Right.
doing.
Is the laser pointer. Thank you. Okay. Sorry, I haven't used this, so. This be for,
It should be just those arrows.
and that's it?
Yeah.
Or how does it connect to?
Batteries are obviously working with the laser pointer. Right?
Yeah. Do I need it connected? Do we have?
Pam wanted everybody to know that we're already live and she's posting it now on YouTube.
Thank you. Don't worry about it. I'll just use
Oh, no.
I'll just use the computer
Okay.
with the screen so plus I'm not going to really be walking around.
Are you sure? There's gotta be something missing.
Have you checked to make sure that it's going to project? That's far more important.
This is Steve. Hi. Well, pretty good. I think here was some, yeah, Simon 102 and Judge Dixon's trial. I'm not sure where. Yeah, oh, that's okay. Once you're in the right place. Okay. Bye. Yes. This is your copy, but it's basically the final this is one that's shot at.
Okay. Okay, thanks so much.
Probably you to sign it when we're all done.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, thank you.
It was up there. So there it is.
Mr. Sanders will be joining you in just a moment.
There we go.
There we go. Okay.
Can you make the stand a little shorter so that it'll be right on the screen? There we go.
There.
And if you move, if you twist it, just twist the whole table, then it won't be. Oh, I like that. Where it's skinny on the end.
Wait. Better? Alright.
Maybe a little bit farther. I mean, twist it a little bit farther.
Okay.
You know what it is.
If you go.
Did you find it? Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Okay, I'm not gonna touch any more buttons.
Yeah, it's perfect.
Aurora, can you make the courtroom, the computer labeled courtroom view, the host, please?
There we go. Perfect.
I'm so sorry about this. I don't know
No,
what. I don't
it's all set.
understand.
Oh, no, it came back up.
Close. There, okay. You good?
Thank you.
Yes.
I'm gonna ask Jenny about this. I don't know what she did that I'm not doing. Oh, and then Eric. Yeah, sure. And then this is the finding of fact. That's the PowerPoint.
All rise. Superior Court for the state of Washington is now in session. The Honorable James J. Dixon presiding.
Please be seated. Court is back on the record in the matter of State of Washington versus Tim Eyman et al., cause number 17-2-01546-34. This matter is before the court this morning for the court to consider closing arguments of the parties. The court will advise the parties and any observers that closing arguments are available for viewing on YouTube. The YouTube site is 17-2-01546-34, State of Washington versus Tim Eyman, ET period space AL period. That link is also available, as I may have mentioned, on the court's website. Court will now consider closing arguments. Mr. Newman, good morning.
Good morning, Your Honor. Eric Newman for the state of Washington. Your Honor, the public policy of the state of Washington is that political campaign contributions and expenditures be fully disclosed to the public, and that the public's right to know the financing of political campaigns far outweighs any right that these matters remain secret and private. That is the preamble, the statement of purpose of the Fair Campaign Practices Act. It's not a platitude. Those words mean something, and they meant something to the voters in 1972 when this law was passed, ironically, by initiative. And they mean even more today. Election transparency today is of paramount importance. And these words are the words that support that. But to Defendant Eyman, these words and this law is just an obstacle. It's an obstruction between him and getting money from voters. It's something to get around. And for years, he's done exactly that. Try to get around this statute and this preamble to enrich himself. For years, for 20 years, he has schemed and worked and planned to overcome the FCPA and its requirements. And he's done so not only by doing it, but by documenting. He's documented it over and over again in the form of emails and letters to his co-conspirators, to voters, to supporters, laying out his plans. You've seen the documents that I'm talking about throughout the trial, and you've seen how he's used them. You've also heard his excuses. There's always an excuse. There's always an explanation. There's always, well, I wrote that down, but I didn't mean it. Or I wrote that down, but I never sent it. Or don't pay any attention to the fact that I fabricated that, and I admit that I fabricated that. Always an excuse. And when faced with the documents himself, he pushes off. When pressed, he pleads the fifth. When really pressed, he admits he was fibbing. On the last day of trial, the end of his testimony, he admitted he was fibbing. When presented with a document that said he had in fact violated the Fair Campaign Practices Act, he said he was fibbing. He was fibbing. He's been fibbing for 20 years. He's been fibbing to voters. He's been fibbing to donors. He's been fibbing to his own partners. He's been fibbing to the PDC. And you have to decide if he's been fibbing to you. I want to go through the evidence that we're going to talk about today in general categories. Your Honor, the state filed yesterday an updated findings of fact and conclusions of law. I've given a copy to the clerk if you're interested in a paper copy. I will tell you, I don't want to tell you how to do your job, but I'll tell you that this closing loosely tracks those findings. So if you want to take notes within the findings, however you want to do it, I just want to let you know that it does loosely track the findings so that you can follow along. Though there have been literally hundreds, if not thousands, of violations of the FCPA, the state's claims are based on kind of 5 broader categories. The I-1185 campaign, this is the $308,000 kickback. The 517 campaign, this is a loan that Defendant Eyman made to the 517 campaign through Citizens in Charge, that Virginia organization, and his getting that loan paid back by contributors to 517. The concealed payments for political work, that's the $766,000 that you've already found were contributions in support of ballot propositions. It also includes $71,000 in additional contributions that weren't included in that original number because the records hadn't been provided yet. The next one is the misappropriated refund. That's that $23,000 that Voters Want More Choices sent to DataBar, a mailing company. And when DataBar was giving a refund, the refund went to Defendant Eyman instead of to his political committee. And then the last thing is the reporting violations and individual reporting violations that we'll talk about as we go along. So those 5 broader categories. But before we get to that, we have to go back. We have to go way back. Defendant Eyman's history is important to the claims that we have here today for 2 reasons. One, they show intentionality, which is an issue when assessing a penalty, and also to show that this is an ongoing conspiracy, that it's a continuous plan that has been going on for 20 years. This quote is from the permanent offense case, which happened back in 2002. You may recall Defendant Eyman has a judgment against him from 2002 from the permanent offense case. And at the time, he admitted that he created a company, Permanent Offense, to hide the fact that he was making money on his campaigning work. He faced an enforcement action by the Attorney General's office, and that enforcement action ended in a judgment where he had to pay about $55,000 in sanctions, and there was a requirement that he never again serve as a treasurer on a campaign. You would think that would have fixed the problem, but it didn't. The ink wasn't even dry on the judgment when he started scheming to enrich himself again. So the permanent offense judgment was signed on August 12th, 2002. This letter was sent out on August 7th, 2002. So it hadn't even gone to the judge yet. It was entered, but it hadn't even gone to the judge yet. And Defendant Eyman sent out a fundraising letter asking voters to send him money. So he's currently being sued, and he sends out this fundraising letter. And somebody made a complaint about it, and the PDC addressed it. The PDC followed up with him. And a week later, after some discussions with Defendant Eyman, the PDC sent him a letter, and it specifically said, these are reportable unless they are purely for legal expenses and not to pay your family's personal expenses. So the PDC made that clear to Defendant Eyman back then, and he said, no, this is all for legal defenses, or legal defense costs, and so the case was closed. So this is only 2 days after the permanent offense judgment. Excuse me. Despite that, because of those instructions, the following spring, Defendant Eyman continues to raise money for himself, but he comes out and he shows the voters, I know I'm supposed to be reporting this stuff. I know this is political work and I'm supposed to be reporting it. Exhibit 75 is a fundraising email that he sent out to his supporters, which he admits that he's supposed to be reporting his fundraising work. So there can be no question that he knew what he was supposed to be doing at the time. So you see that there's a jump there from 2003 to 2010. So 7 years, there's a black hole. And I'm going to show you some documents in a minute to show that Defendant Eyman was scheming during those 7 years, and he was enriching himself, and he was taking money. But what's missing from those 7 years is documentation. And the reason is Defendant Eyman wouldn't give it to the PDC. When the PDC started its investigation, it asked for back records, and they weren't provided. And on the false argument that this was before the statute of limitations, so I don't have to give it to you. By the time the Attorney General's office got involved and sent out subpoenas to get these records, they'd been destroyed. His personal records have been destroyed, and banking records are only good for 7 years. So we can only go back to 2010 because all the records were destroyed in the interim. But we'll look at some records to show that he was still scheming during that time. As I said, Defendant Eyman documents his schemes pretty well. And you may recall this letter. It's Exhibit 180. It's a letter from Defendant Eyman to Roy Ruffino, who owned Citizen Solutions, Inc., one of two owners, and eventually owned Citizen Solutions, LLC, one of two owners. In this letter, there are a few things that stand out. First, there's an admission that for years, even in 2010, they have had a mutually beneficial business relationship. He's been getting money from the Citizen Solutions owners for years, even in 2010, during that black hole where we're missing documentation. Something else that jumps out here is he admits that the money that they're giving him is for initiative work. So he talks about I-1053 right here. So he's admitting this is for initiative work, which requires reporting. But something that really jumps out at me in this first half of this letter is this sentence down here. He talks about getting generous checks in the past, and he says if you choose to do so again this year, you and Eddie will decide at the end of the year how much that amount will be. So he's expecting a kickback. Now, don't forget, he was also getting paid by Help Us Help Taxpayers, his committee for fundraising for himself. So he's getting paid by Help Us Help Taxpayers. He's saying, hopefully you'll give me another kickback this year. But what really jumps out is, whatever that number is, my goal is to have you increase it by an additional $150,000. He's insatiable. He's already been paid twice illegally, and he's got a plan for one more payment, $150,000. And he says what his plan is. It's the exact same plan that he had for I-1185, which in 2012, which is one of the initiatives we're here to talk about. This is the second half of that same Exhibit 180. And here, his plan, this $150,000, his plan is to have Citizen Solutions overcharge his committee by 50 cents a signature and give him the money. He lays out his specific plan here. And when he was asked about this specific plan, he didn't provide an explanation. He pled the fifth. He didn't provide an explanation when he was on the stand either. This is the exact plan that I-1185, which we're here to talk about. It's even the same amount, the extra 50 cents a signature. Now, he might say, I write lots of things down, still talking about this 1053, 2010. I write lots of things down, but I didn't go through with it, and it just never happened. Well, again, he documented the fact that he did go through with this plan, and you can see that here. So Exhibit 77 and 78. This top email is an email from Roy Ruffino, owner of Citizen Solutions. And in it, he's quoting a price of $2 a signature. The bottom email is defendant Eyman forwarding this email to donors. You can see it's the same email. It's from Roy Ruffino, and same subject, but also same timestamp, March 12, 2010, 5:28, March 12, 2010, 5:28. It's the same email. So he forwards the same email, but in the one that he sent to a donor, he changed the language a little bit, and then he increased the price by 50 cents. Exactly what he said he was going to do. 2011, he's still on the take. If you look at Exhibit 80, Exhibit 80 is an email from defendant Eyman to his accountant. And his question to his accountant is, I'm paraphrasing, how much can somebody give me without having to report it to the IRS? That's his question. And his accountant, this is his accountant's response, $13,000. He can give $13,000 and you don't have to tell the government about it. And then, over the next year, look at that, he gets a $13,000 check from Roy Ruffino. And his wife Karen gets a $13,000 check from Roy Ruffino. Now, his wife, Mrs. Eyman, says she hardly knew Roy Ruffino, never had a personal conversation with him, and that she did not know about this $13,000 check. There's another $13,000 check. This one's from Edward Agazarm, you can see here, and it's to Jeremy Eyman, who's a kid. Karen Eyman also testified that she didn't know about this check, and she said, I don't think I've ever even met Edward Agazarm. There's another $13,000 check from Mr. Agazarm to Mr. Eyman's other son. There's another $13,000 check from Edward Agazarm to Mrs. Eyman. Again, she said she didn't know about this and had never met him. And then there's an $8,000 check to defendant Eyman's daughter, who at the time was maybe 7 or 8 years old. He was laundering kickbacks through his children without telling them and without telling his wife. We move on to 2012. In 2012, defendant Eyman has some discussions with Mr. Ruffino by letters, again, documenting his scheming. In Exhibit 182, this is a letter from defendant Eyman to Mr. Ruffino, and you see it's in August of 2012, so this is actually after the kickback, the 1185 kickback. So he's already gotten the $308,000. It's in the bank. And here, he admits that he got $130,000 from Eddie Agazarm over the previous two years. You said this, you'd do the same. And then down here, while he calls it a gift throughout, $26,000 gift, down here in this paragraph, he says, I'd like us to agree on the amount still outstanding from you. This is not a gift. To let me know your gift, what your gift plan is, you need to come up with one. This is not a gift. This is, you owe me. You need to tell me how you're going to pay me. It's a kickback. He sends another letter later in 2012, and again, talks about max gift, that $13,000, the $13,000 limit. He talks about the max gift. He talks about how he's already got $9,900 in cash. And he talks about all of these made-up reasons why Roy Ruffino could say he's giving him a gift, because it obviously is not for one of those reasons. It's a kickback. So I-1185, that's the first of the state's claims. All the rest of that was history. but it was important history in showing his consistent plan to get kickbacks and payments. This I-1185 is the kickback. So this $308,000 amount, there's no question that he got it. The amount is true. He knows he got it. He admits he got it. He knows he spent it on personal expenses. He admits that he spent it on personal expenses. Questions are already established. The only question is this campaign funds or something else? That's the question that you have to answer. So this is all in the conclusions of law. It's in the findings of fact and conclusions of law. This is the statute that we're talking about. And it's a statute that says that expenditures, in this case, campaign expenditures on the I-1185 campaign, which were reported as for signature gathering, were in fact for paying defendant Eyman in any manner so as to effect concealment. That's exactly what we have here. And true to form, defendant Eyman wrote down his plan to his co-conspirators. If you look at Exhibit 84, this is a letter from Tim Eyman to Roy Rufino, William Agazarm, and Eddie Agazarm is copied on it. And in it, he lays out his plan. In it, he talks about this $270,000, and that number is important. The 270 is important because it shows up in other documents. He talks about the $270,000, and he says, assuming there was no extra $270,000. So this is already an agreed amount. This is not an idea. He's not throwing something out here. He's throwing out an alternative plan. If you don't want to give me $270,000, here's another plan that we could come up with. But you owe me $270,000. That's pretty clear. More interesting, and the most critical part of this letter is when it comes to the extra $270,000, I'm working hard to get it for myself by having it paid to Citizen Solutions. He specifically admits that he's laundering money through Citizen Solutions. He's laundering campaign funds through Citizen Solutions in this letter. One more thing about this. So I asked defendant Eyman, because the kickback was actually 308 and this says 270. So I asked him about that. Is this the same number? And he says, I don't remember. No way, this never happened. I can't believe this. I'm outraged that you would bring it up. He says, I don't remember. Probably was. Of course it was. Of course it was. So again, this is not just something he's throwing out there. We have documentation that he went through with the plan and raised the prices of signatures to enrich himself. So this is a letter from Eddie Agazarm, an email that was sent to defendant Eyman, in which he's saying they need an extra 50 cents for signatures. So this email is important, and I'll tell you why in a minute, but he sends this email to defendant Eyman saying, I'm going to raise the signatures, just as consistent with the plan. So before I go back to that email, Exhibit 83, there's a couple things that I want you to look at. First, Exhibit 153. This is just a little piece of Exhibit 153. But Exhibit 153 is a contract between Citizen Solutions and Voters Want More Choices, which was signed by defendant Eyman. And in the contract, you can see in this little snippet that, that Citizen Solutions has agreed to provide signatures for $3.50 each. Now, it's important to remember and make sure that it's clear in your head Citizen Solutions doesn't actually collect signatures. That's not their thing. So they're kind of a clearinghouse. They hire people who collect signatures. So Citizen Solutions says, we get $3.50 a signature, but they use some of that money to hire signature coordinators, companies that actually collect signatures, and then the signature coordinators actually pay signature gatherers, people out on the street with petitions. So there are two middlemen between the client and the actual signature gatherers. So they're getting $3.50 a signature, and you heard lots of, aren't they entitled to make a profit? Absolutely. They're a signature gathering company. They're not a charity. They're entitled to make a profit. But let's look at that profit. So they agreed to do it for $3.50 a signature, but I asked William Agazarm, who was testifying on behalf of Citizen Solutions, and you have this in the designations, in his designated testimony, how much were you paying for the signatures? Like how much was going back out? What's the overhead? And he says they started out at $1, and they eventually bumped up to $1.25 to $1.50. So at the top, Citizen Solutions was paying $1.50 per signature, but they were getting $3.50. So at the contract price, they were making a profit of $2 per signature. More interestingly, I asked Citizen Solutions, I want to get an idea, is that the going rate? $3.50 a signature, $2 extra. No, it's not. When I asked, I-1185 was Citizen Solutions LLC's first campaign. So all other campaigns came after, and I asked, did you ever make that much again? And he says, I asked specifically, what's the most you recall getting per signature after I-1185? And he says $1.50. So under this contract, they're making a $2 profit, and on all previous contracts, they were only getting $1.50 gross. So their profit was greater than their actual gross on every other campaign, the campaigns where they were not paying a kickback. But they come with this, we need 50 cents more. And Eddie sent that email to Defendant Eyman, and he approved it. So let's go back to that email. Here it is, 4:13 p.m. This is exhibit, the numbers are backwards. This is exhibit 83, and this is exhibit 82. Now, Eddie sends this email and he says, Tim, it's really bad. We're going to have to raise the price. We're not going to be able to gather signatures. We're not going to make it. So he's given Tim the bad news here in exhibit 83. But if you look at exhibit 82, it's pretty much the same email, but 6 hours later. And just some of the wording's changed, like he's cleaning it up. Why would Eddie send Tim a second email with the exact same information, but with the words touched up? Because they had a phone call, and Tim said, well, I'd like to change this and that. I'm going to send this out to donors. I need to clean it up. I want it the way I want it. That's why there's two versions of the same email 6 hours apart. Well, why would they do that? Like I said, he wanted to send it out to donors, and he did send it out to donors. So you go to the top of exhibit 83, after they agreed on this 50 cents, he sends it out, Defendant Eyman sends it out to Greg Hannon. And you heard from Greg Hannon, he's one of the donors that provided some of the bigger, his organization provided some of the bigger contributions to the I-1185 campaign. So they're constructing evidence. There's more. I brought these two up. This is Exhibit 180 and Exhibit 84. And this first one is from 2010, and this one is from 2012. But I was really struck by the similarity in language. The extra 150 was really stepped it up, because now it's the extra 270. It's the same scheme, exact same scheme. That 270 appears in this email. This is an email from Eddie Agazarm, his co-conspirator, on June 26, 2012. So the campaign's almost over. And he says, that 270, exact same number that Tim said he was going to get paid, that 270 is really hampering. We're not going to make it if we don't get this extra 270. But this is a fabrication. We know it's a fabrication. First, because there was not $270,000 outstanding on the contract. The campaign was almost done. But the last payment that Citizen Solutions made was on for signatures was on July 3rd. And they had enough money in their accounts on this day to pay for all the rest of the signatures. It was done. But he says, wow, we really need this 270, the exact same number. Additionally, he says, Mr. Agazarm, on the 27th, the next day after the $270,000 is really hampering us, he sends this email the very next day to defendant Eyman. And in it, he says, it's really bad out there. We're going to need to pay the signature gatherers or more. They're going to leave. They're going to leave the state. I need an extra $150. Problem with that is, William Agazarm, Citizen Solutions, said they never paid a signature gatherers more than $1.50 in the whole campaign. So this bump that is allegedly going to signature gatherers is as much as they ever made. With this bump, it brings up the price of signatures to $5.50 each. Well, for a company that never again got more than $1.50 a signature, they're at $5.50. And they did not pass this along. This all went into their pockets so that they could put it into defendant Eyman's pockets. And they admit it. They admit they never paid more than $1.50. So this $1.50 was just invented to be sent to donors. All right, so you might remember Exhibit 351. This is a summary of the accounts of Citizen Solutions. And there's two accounts. This account is kind of their accounts receivable, like when the money comes in, they put it in that account. And this account is when they spend the money. And there are a few exceptions. One of them's on here. But generally, that's how it works. They take the money into this account, then they transfer it to this account, and then they pay their bills or take their money or whatever. So this first account, you remember Mr. Agazarm's email saying, we got to have that 270 or we're not going to make it, was on the 26th. So this is on the 28th. They get $64,000 from, and let me be clear. When that email that on the 26th went out, they already had enough to pay for all the signatures for the rest of the campaign. It was in the bank. But he sends out, we need this 270, and their $64,000 comes in 2 days later. $45,000 comes in 2 days later. For nothing. This is 100% of the payments after the 26th went to funding the kickback. Then here, this is interesting, on July 3rd, Signature Solutions pays for the last of the signatures. So they're all paid for. That tells us, one, they don't need any more money, and two, they're all gathered. They don't pay for signatures that haven't happened yet. They're in their hands. Signature Solutions, Citizen Solutions has the signatures in hand, or they wouldn't have paid for them. And they probably had them before this date, but we know they got them no later than that date because that's the day they paid for them. So there's no more money going out from Citizen Solutions after that date. But let's look. So we know all the signatures are in the door. We're not gathering any more signatures. There's nobody on the street anymore gathering signatures on July 3rd. 2 days later, defendant Eyman sends out an email on July 5th to George Johnson and Mike Dunmeyer donors. And he says, we're very short, plus we need a very necessary cushion. You saw those emails about the cushion. 300,000 signatures is the minimum. We want a little cushion in case something goes wrong with them, whatever. This is the very necessary cushion. So he's talking about a very necessary cushion of $50,000 to $100,000. When he sent that email, the signatures were in hand. No more were being gathered. They were so confident in the number they had that they didn't have anybody on the street anymore. But he's still fundraising for this cushion that they already had in hand. This is on July 10th. He's still talking about being $300,000 or $30,000 short, sending it to donors. He's saying they're short. He says, we have total due to Citizen Solutions. So he's telling the donors, we really got to pay Citizen Solutions. We're in trouble. Two things. One, the signatures were already at the Secretary of State's office. On this date, they went in on July 6th. They were submitted on July 6th. So the signatures were already submitted 4 days earlier. So that's problem number one. But problem number two is this total due to Citizen Solutions. All right? He's like, well, the signatures are in, but we haven't paid for them yet. Well, we know that is false because the last time Voters Want More Choices paid for signatures was on July 6th, 4 days earlier. So he's telling donors, I need to pay Citizen Solutions, but Citizen Solutions had already been paid. You see no more money coming in from campaigns after that date. So we've gotten a couple defenses, couple schemes, couple explanations of why that's not as bad as it really seems. All of that stuff, it's not that big a deal. And the first one is Stan Long. Stan Long is the treasurer. It's 100% his fault. I can't help it if he did a bad job. The problem with blaming Stan Long, too far. First, defendant Eyman specifically swore under oath to Mr. Perkins that he never told Stan Long about the $308,000. He did it in 2014. He said it was none of his business and he didn't tell him. About 4 or 5 months later, Stan Long died, and all of a sudden, oh yeah, I told Stan Long all the time, all along, and he told me not to worry about it. He changed his story after Stan Long was no longer around to defend himself. He threw somebody who had spent the previous 12 years, 15 years, helping him for free under the bus. But it was patently false. So either it was false when he said he told him, or it was false when he said that he didn't. But we're probably going to go with the first story because it was when Stan Long was still alive to say otherwise. Also, Stan Long, as you heard, was a ministerial treasurer. So his job was, we give you the information, you put it in the boxes on the form that it's supposed to go on, sign it and send it in. Stan Long can't put information into a form if he doesn't know about it. That's his job, is putting it in and making sure that it is in the form that it's supposed to. But he can't do it if he doesn't know about it. So Exhibit 90, this is an email from defendant Eyman to his partners at Voters Want More Choices, so the other people on the committee. Stan Long's name is not up there. This email didn't go to Stan Long. And in it, defendant Eyman is specifically saying, I am going to violate the Fair Campaign Practices Act. I am going to hide something from the PDC even though I know I'm supposed to do it. It says it right here. Yes, I know the PDC wants reports on July 16 for activity from June 1 through July 16, but I don't want that. I don't want to comply, and we're not going to. Why would we do that? Well, he says why. And he says about his donors, if they see our cash on hand, they will say we have plenty of money and that we have no shortfall, and they'll be less incentivized to help us. If they know the truth, they won't give us the money. So don't tell the PDC, because the PDC will snitch us out to all the donors in the world and tell them, we already have the money and we're just sticking this in our pockets. So there's that same email. A week later, he does it again. Again, Stan Long's not on here, just the Fagans. And he says, hold off on including deposits of recent donations, but be totally up to date on expenditures. Again, create a false sense of shortfall so that people will keep sending us money based on that bad information. So here, he's not only withholding information, he's specifically altering it to make his financial situation worse than it actually was in order to mislead donors. The next defense was this $308,000. It wasn't a kickback, it was for future work. I was going to bring them business. Well, again, the documents don't bear that out. Here's a few reasons why. First, this is an email from William Agasarm to defendant Eyman. This is on July 8, 2012. And he says, the first sentence, my first and foremost goal is to ensure that you get paid what is properly owed. Past tense. We owe you this money. Not, we're working on a deal, we're going to make sure we get you paid for this future work. This is past tense. We know that it doesn't have anything to do with this future work because, well, one, Roy Ruffino, who owns half of Citizen Solutions, so this money is half his, doesn't even know about it. He doesn't even know this plan has been hatched, that he's going to send this money. He says, while I know you are trying to avoid telling Roy exactly what the funds are for, he's trying to keep it a secret. These two are scheming. With the son-in-law of his old friend, Eddie Agasarm, who he's been scheming with for decades. They're trying to keep it a secret. The last reason why this email tells us that it is not for future work is he talks about this partnership. He talks about the partnership. With a drive now completed, Roy shouldn't have any distractions regarding thinking about a partnership as well. Why would they pay him $308,000 for the next 3 years' work in advance and also give him a cut? He's already paid for it. Like, they have a contract, $308,000, you're going to take care of us for 3 years. Why would they make him a partner too? It doesn't make any sense. More documents. This is Exhibit 184, and it's from April 23rd, 2013. So this is the following spring. So well within the 3-year contract that defendant Eyman had entered into to bring them business, to bring Citizen Solutions business. But in this email, it's from Eddie. And I apologize if I use the word Eddie. That's what he has been called through the trial, so that's where I'm going with. And there are two Agasarms, so I'm not trying to be disrespectful. So it's from Eddie to defendant Eyman. It's about a signature drive, a 2013 signature drive, and he's talking about a 3-way split. Profits above $100,000 can be split 3 ways. Again, why would they give him a cut if they have already paid him for 3 years? Doesn't make any sense. They did it again. So here, maybe the 3-way split, they were talking about somebody else. They were going to split it 3 ways. The two Agasarms and Ruffino. Maybe that's what he was talking about. There's a good explanation. Well, the problem is, he did it again. A month later, 2 months later, in June, a different campaign. And this time, he actually says, Roy, William, Tim, 3-way split. Why would they split 3 ways if they've already paid him to bring that business in? There's more. This is Exhibit 183 that we saw earlier from the early 2012 scheming. This is a letter from defendant Eyman to Roy Ruffino. And in it, he's talking about, you owe me. This is the you owe me letter. And in it, he says how this maximum gift, so this $13,000 that he got from his accountant, and he says that leaves $45,000 later this fall with remaining $39,000 left for 2013. Why is Roy paying him? This letter was written in December 2012, so he has already got $308 in his pocket. Why is Roy paying him for the rest of 2012 and for 2013 if Roy has already paid him for 2012 and 2013 through this future contract? There's more. This is the confirmation. Defendant Eyman is confirming that he got the $308,000 payment. And he says, confirmed, receipt today. And it says, share with Roy if you'd like. So again, still, money's in the bank. And they had not told Mr. Ruffino that he just lost half of $308,000 to defendant Eyman in this kickback. That's not a contract for future. But here's the real kicker. We asked about this email in defendant Eyman's deposition, and he talked about it on the stand too. After this confirmation of $308,000 that was paid in advance for 3 years' work, he never spoke to him again. To this day, he never spoke to William Agazarm again. He said he never followed up. He never asked what I was doing. I never spoke to him again. I never emailed him again. Can you imagine a company, one person, because Roy didn't even know about this, one person sending $308,000 for future work and never checking in to see if anything happened? Never even, hey, Tim, what's going on? How's that $308,000 treating you? He never spoke to him again. Here's the last one, and I think this one's pretty interesting too. So down here, this is Exhibit 155. Down here, it's a Seattle Times article, and some people are just making comments to a Seattle Times article about I-1185. And Tim thinks it's pretty funny. He takes this comment that somebody some random person named, it's on here somewhere. But some random person, doesn't matter who it was, made a comment about the I-1185 campaign, and that random person said the current one, I-1185, will likely pass and found to be unconstitutional, and Eyman will say thank you and deposit his check for $300,000. And Eyman thinks that's pretty funny. He sends it to Eddie with a little smiley face, and Eddie also thinks that's pretty funny. He says, damn, LOL. They think it's funny because this random person who made this comment called it exactly, got the number exactly right, $300,000 kickback plus the tax. This is an admission that that $300,000 was a kickback, and they think it's pretty funny. So that's the I-1185 campaign. Next we have I-517. They kind of overlap. They were all kind of happening in that 2012 time period, though 517 went into 2013. Now, just to remind you, the I-517 is defendant Eyman sent a loan to citizens in charge with the express purpose of it being spent on I-517 for signature gathering. And I'm going to talk about it a little bit. So there's the loan, and making a concealed loan, we'll see it in a minute. Making a concealed loan is a violation of the FCPA, but also concealing the people who paid it back is a second, well, many violations of the FCPA coming back. So we should first look at the law. So this is that concealment statute. And it says, no contribution shall be made anonymously. That's an important word because it's going to come up. Like I said, Defendant Eyman is really good about documenting his violations of the FCPA. So, anonymously or by one person through an agent, like sending it to citizens in charge and having citizens in charge say that they were the donor. So as to affect concealment. So it's contribution. This wasn't really a contribution, it was a loan, right? Well, definition of contribution, the very first word, a loan. So loans are contributions, and this absolutely was one. It was through an agent, it was anonymous, so as to affect concealment. Let's look at the documents. There's further description of who the loan should be attributed to, and it's to the lender. Defendant Eyman. So $182,806, that's the number. Again, this is an agreed amount. $182,806 is how much of the $200,000 that Defendant Eyman sent to citizens in charge spent on I-517. So this amount was reported, $182,806, was reported, but it was reported as a contribution from citizens in charge, not from Defendant Eyman, who was the actual. So of this 182, 103 of it was paid back by other contributors contributing to the 517 campaign to pay back this loan. That means $79,806 was just a straight contribution because this loan has been written off. So Defendant Eyman just gave $79,806 to the 517 campaign, and he loaned 103. That was concealed, and the payment back was concealed. How do we know? Well, we can go back to 2011. This is December 2011. This is about 6 months before the 517 scam kicks off. And we can see that Defendant Eyman has pass-through donations on his mind back in December, because he sends this letter to Paul Jacob. Paul Jacob owns Citizens, well, he runs Citizens in Charge. And he says, who can I contact about a pass-through donation? So this is exactly what the 517 scheme was. So I give money to an organization, and they give it back to the campaign. So he's already thinking about it. But we don't have to read his mind, because he actually wrote down word for word his plan. Here's what I'd like to do. Me personally loan my own money to Paul Jacobs Group, Citizens in Charge, to get I-517 on the ballot. Roughly $160,000. It's enough to guarantee that I-517 gets enough SIGs by December 31st. He wrote it down. Again, he's not just throwing things out here. He actually sent the money. And he admits. He admitted after he sent it, it was for 517. Let's look at the documents. Here's a letter from Defendant Eyman in 2013. He's trying to get his money back. So this is to Mark Bearwalt, who's a donor. And he says right here, as you know, I'm not a rich guy, but I'm $180,000 into this thing and about to put in another $50,000. $182,000 of his money got spent on it. So he actually has the number right there. And we know this is for 517. So he specifically admits, yes, I sent that money for 517 in this email. But it gets better. The documentation is better for the state. He says that that there's an anonymous donor who's matching 517 contributions. No contributions may be made anonymously. Sorry, I missed one. You might remember that, I'm going back to this Mark Bearwalt. And just like I did, you can donate anonymously through Citizens in Charge. That's exactly what the state has accused him of doing. That is exactly what this trial is about, is his words, anonymously contributing through citizens in charge. He wrote it out. And that's where he said he was fibbing. I put this in front of him. It was the last thing that I talked to him about when he was on the stand was, what's going on here? You said you did it. And he said he was fibbing. So again, he says to a different donor, tell your donors, this is to Paul Jacob. He's telling Paul Jacob, tell him I'm matching the $50,000. Or he says that you have an anonymous donor, but Paul Jacob said, defendant Eyman was the anonymous donor. You have that testimony in Paul Jacob's testimony. And Paul Jacob, so we're all on the same page. His co-conspirator, Paul Jacob, also says, last year, Citizens in Charge raised more than $200,000. That's the $200,000 that defendant Eyman sent him to put I-517 on the ballot. Everybody's in agreement. All the conspirators are in agreement that that $200,000 was for 517, and that it was done anonymously through Citizens in Charge. But I have a little bit more. So Exhibit 200 is a letter from defendant Eyman. This is right when the money is being sent for the 517, the very beginning. This is the first payment. And he says, my company, Watchdog, because he did it through Watchdog, is loaning Citizens in Charge $75,000. And he doesn't say what it's for. He says, you could pay it back whenever you want to. I'm just sending you $75,000 as a loan. So this is on July 11th. He's sending $75,000. Then on July 12th, the next day, another $25,000 that he sent electronically. And another letter, July 12th. And these are loans. Then, also on July 12th, we got this off of defendant Eyman's computer. Another letter to Paul Jacob, and he says, good talking to you this week. So he's recounting something that has already happened. And he says, I'm really excited that we were able to come to an agreement on Citizens in Charge being paid consulting fees for working for my company. In exchange for payments by Tim Eyman, Watchdog for Taxpayers, to Citizens in Charge, estimated to be $200,000, it's the same number, during the rest of 2012, you and your organization will try to secure future clients and future support for me and my company. The thing about this letter, other than it is inconsistent with these, where he says it's a loan, he admits he fabricated it. He admits this conversation never happened. So does Paul Jacob. Both sides of this invented conversation say it never happened. They never talked about it. They never had a deal. They never had a plan. They never talked about it. Both of them say it. But it's written in past tense. This is clearly a fabrication. He's saying, great talking to you this week. He never talked to him. And he said, well, I write things out. Who knows? Yeah, I never send these things. It's just an idea. Who writes a past tense letter and puts his signature on it that he knows when he's writing it is false? So, like I said, the $182,806 going out has to be reported as a contribution because it's a loan to the campaign. The $103,000 that came back, which defendant Eyman admits came back, has to be reported as contributions in paying it off, and the remaining $79,000 you'll see in there is a forgiveness of indebtedness, which is also within the definition of a contribution. So we get to the $182,000, that's one violation, and then $103,000 in additional contributions that went unreported. And you could see defendant Eyman fundraising to pay this 517 loan back. You see lots of names. There's Lee Zerer, this is John Monson, Morris and Don, Dear Mark, over and over. He said he'd provide a dollar for dollar payment to me personally. So this is donations to Citizens in Charge Foundation so that these people can write this off, their payments to defendant Eyman, so they can write it off on their tax. Over and over, he said he'd provide a dollar for dollar payment to me personally. There it is again. There it is again. Not only do these letters show that they're scheming to hide the fact that these people are paying back the SPY 17 loan, but it says that they have already given money. All of these people have already given money. He was like, hey, I got a great idea. Why don't I give you your money back and you give me more and you can write it off on your taxes by laundering your money through Citizens in Charge Foundation. That's what the letter's about. So all these exhibits are in there, 112 to 118. You can look at them for yourself. They're all pretty much the same, but different names. But interestingly, oh, I forgot about this one. This is a letter to Susie Burke. We met Susie Burke. She came in and testified. And here, Defendant Eyman says, last year you donated $5,000 to Citizens in Charge Foundation. So he said this has already happened. The money's in the bank. Right? It's already been spent. I hope you can do that or more this year. And just like last year, the same amount you donate to their foundation will eventually go to helping me and my family. So, just like last year means what she donated last year went to help him and his family, and the one coming in this year also designed to help him and his family. So this is a list of donors. It's incomplete. Citizens in Charge says it's incomplete. But this is a list of donors. And if you look back at that Exhibit 112 through 118, you'll see that a lot of those names show up on here. There's Susie Burke right there. There's John Monson right there. I'm trying to see. Morris, Mirror, one of those letters with him. So you'll see that they actually did give the money because this is an accounting of some of the contributions that came in to pay back the 517 loan. All right. Next is the concealed payments for political work. This is the 776 that you've already found and the $71,000 that the state put on at trial. And there it is broken out, $71,055. And you can see the actual checks are Exhibit 40, but the summary is Exhibit 355 that has all those payments it lays out. Now, I want to be clear, the $71,000, nothing is included in that $71,000 that was marked as for legal defense, unless you'll recall from the testimony, Defendant Eyman used to carefully segregate his defense funds and his personal funds. And if it went into the defense funds bank account, it's not included in that $71,000. If it said it was for legal defense, but it went into his personal account and he spent it on personal expenses, then it is included. So if you go through the checks, I don't know if you're going to, but if you go through the checks, you might find a couple that say legal fund or legal defense or something like that. They are in there because he spent them on personal expenses, even though they were given for legal defense. So this $837,000 has to be reported if he's a political committee. Your Honor found in February of last year, so almost a year ago now, that he is a political committee. But the state has put on more than enough evidence for you to find that as a matter of fact, that this $71,000 came in and it should have been reported because he's a political committee. And I'll talk about the definition of political committee and how it works in a minute during the reporting section. But you have heard lots of argument over the 3.5 years, almost 4 years that you and I have known each other, that these were gifts and donations. They were gifts, 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 gifts. I want to be perfectly clear that the contribution definition in the FCPA includes gifts and donations. The words are right in there. Just because you called it a gift doesn't mean it's not a contribution. In fact, it means it is a contribution. So for the $71,000, which is I'm going to focus on because you already found the 766, here are the payments. This is Exhibit 352, and here are the payments that add up to that $71,000. So January 18, this was from a bank account that we didn't have at the time of the 766, and August and September is from accounts that, well, your order was in August, so this hadn't happened yet. So it adds up to $71,000. It should be made clear that this number is not complete because some money from January of 2018 was included in the 766 from other accounts that we did have records for. So he brought in at least $18,250 in January of 2018. But there were other accounts that were included in that 766. And then all of these withdrawals are included there. You know, to be fair, it is a violation when the money's coming in, and it's a second violation when it's coming out. So all of these withdrawals are a violation on their own. And you'll see when we get to the penalty stage, we're not seeking this $150,000 when it's going back out. Though the statute allows it, it seemed kind of inequitable to double charge. So you'll see that it's not there, but it still should have been reported as going back out. And so when we talk about the reporting, you'll see this chart again. I'll bring it back up. So whether or not, or what this money was for, you've seen more documents than I can imagine that show his constant fundraising for his political work. But the best way for you to see that these were political contributions is to see what witnesses he put on the stand. So he put 3 donors on the stand. Those were his best 3 of thousands of people. Those are the 3 that he put on a stand. And let's talk about those donors and see if these were political contributions. First, there's Susie Burke. You remember Susie Burke? She's on the stand, and she was like, I'm just helping him out. I'm just helping a guy out. That's not how Defendant Eyman saw it, and that's what's important. It is an expectation of contributions in support of the ballot proposition that matters, not what the donor thinks. And here, we have an email from Defendant Eyman to Ms. Burke, and in it, he talks about his compensation, and he admits that she wrote him a check for compensation. It's not a gift. It's not helping him out. She is compensating. You compensate somebody for something they did for you. It's not a gift. And he says, will you hire me again? And he's saying why? He says, we got a fantastic statewide initiative qualified. That's exactly it. That's exactly what the state is trying to prove, is that he got compensated for getting initiatives qualified, and he didn't report it. He says it again down here, compensation. He wants $5,000 as compensation. Larry Jensen. He came down from Skagit County, and the numbers were kind of all over the place, but it was at least $1,000 that he had given Defendant Eyman over the years. But I asked him, well, had you met him? No, he's met him now. But when he gave him this $1,000+ he had never met him. You don't send a gift to somebody you never met unless you're trying to support something they're doing. And that's exactly what Larry Jensen did. And then last we have Sid Mayeto. A couple things about Mr. Mayeto's contributions. First, you may recall, Mr. Mayeto actually intervened in this case. He filed an intervener complaint, and in it, he said, and I asked him about this on the stand, he said that he gives money to Defendant Eyman to allow Mr. Eyman to continue to associate with Mr. Mayeto in the future for political speech and advocacy. That's exactly what the PDC back in 2002 said you have to report. If you're getting paid to allow you to do advocacy work, you have to report it. And Mr. Mayeto said, that's exactly why I gave it to him. That was their understanding. Additionally, this is just a few checks, there's tons of them. If you go through the records, there's lots of checks from Mr. Maieto. But let's say, thanks. Thanks for everything, thanks, thank you. It's not a gift. You don't send somebody a gift and say thank you unless they did something for you. You don't send a Christmas gift or a 4th of July gift, whatever you give gifts for, and say thank you unless somebody did something for you. Now, if you send a thank you gift, then you say thank you. Right? If somebody painted your house for you, you might send them a basket of muffins and say thank you. But they did something for you. You don't say thank you if they didn't do something for you. And here, over and over, he says thank you. Again, this is, I have this up here. This one says legal defense. I don't remember if it's included or not, but Mr. Perkins carefully segregated the legal defense checks that ended up in $71,000. And then last is the misappropriated refund, the $23,000 from Danabar. This is an easy one. It's easy because defendant Eyman admits that his committee, Voters Want More Choices, paid more than this amount to Danabar to do some sort of mailer or something. They didn't do it. And so they were going to give him a refund. So they call him up and say, hey, you got $23,000 refund coming to you. Voters Want More Choices. And defendant Eyman said this on the stand. No, I told them to give it to me. And they did give it to me. I put it in my Watchdog account. Then I pulled it out of my Watchdog account and I spent it. He admitted that it belonged to Voters Want More Choices. All of it. Now, this is an easy one. You just took campaign donations from his committee and spent it. And then last we come to reporting violations. And there are a lot of reporting violations, and you've already found some of them, and there are more. So I want to talk about those. And questions, you've already answered, was he a political committee? But the state's asking you to find it again, as a matter of fact, and has put on evidence of that. So was he a political committee subject to registration? Did he register? Did he receive contributions in support of a ballot proposition? Did he report them or conceal them? Did he make contributions in support of ballot propositions? Did he report them or conceal them? Those are questions that you have to answer today on all of these, not just the money coming to him personally. So again, we're going back to political committee, and I can't count the number of times that you have heard, none of this money was spent on campaigns. The money that was coming in to defendant Eyman, the money that people from around the state were writing him checks, none of that was spent on campaigns. He couldn't possibly be a political committee. You have also heard, never in the history of the world has there ever been a walking, talking political committee. Like a person could never be a political committee. It says person right in the statute. And down here, it says having the expectation of receiving contributions or making expenditures in support. Either way, so if he has an expectation of it coming in, it doesn't matter what he spent it on. It only matters that he had an expectation of receiving it for work on ballot propositions. Now, if we look at case law, this is State v. Evergreen Freedom Foundation. It says it again. And if the statute were not perfectly clear when it said a person could be a political committee, the Court of Appeals laid it out for us. It's a person or an organization. So the Court of Appeals said, it's a person. Like a person can be a political committee. Of course they can. Otherwise, you could do exactly what defendant Eyman did, which was just not form a committee. Don't get a friend, don't get a co-conspirator, and you can do whatever you want. The statute doesn't apply to you. Of course it applies to him. And the key is an expectation of receiving. So it doesn't even matter if he received them. If he has an expectation of receiving contributions to further electoral political goals, then he's a political committee. So we have to decide if he had an expectation of receiving contributions to further, sorry, I want to get the languages up, to further electoral political goals. That's what we're looking for. So it doesn't matter if these people actually send him any money. Let's just look at these fundraising emails he sent out. And it says, I rely on you to donate so I can continue to fight for taxpayers. Political goal. And he actually says it's for compensation. Like, I'm not making enough money fighting for taxpayers for political goals, so I need some more money. Let's look at this one. I worked really hard for the past 16 years, but you got to make it worth it for me or I'm not going to keep doing it. You've been really helpful on the initiative. Could you send me some money too, please? I'm scrambling because our compensation is only $37,000. I'm asking supporters to donate to the new initiative and provide a financial gift to me personally. We beat back an absolutely horrible anti-tax initiative bill, lobbying efforts, and he says, and one of those, like a form request email is attached to this exhibit, asking for money. This is a great one. This is an email from Defendant Eyman to a supporter, and Defendant Eyman is about to drive out to Eastern Washington to make a speech at some organization. I don't remember which organization it was, but he's going to make a speech, and so he sends this to the person who invited him. Hey, about halfway through the speech, can you stand up and say how great Defendant Eyman has been and how you've saved thousands of dollars on car tabs, and thanks to his efforts, this collection is for Tim for all he's done for us over the years. Can you pass the hat? So he's specifically saying, can you get these people to pay me in cash for all the work that I have done on initiatives over the years? Again, it doesn't matter if he got a penny of this. He had an expectation of receiving it when he sent out this email. And then this is a letter, I think it's to Kemper Freeman, where he says, you called me and said you'd be good for another 10 for Tim. So $10,000 for Tim. I've left messages since that 10 for Tim for last year. He says it's for qualifying and passing I-1366. So he specifically says, you are paying me for the work that I did on 1366. And then another 10 for this year's efforts during the session and working hard to stop ST3, another initiative. He says that's what it's for. Again, it doesn't matter if he actually get paid. And Kemper Freeman did pay him. And Kemper Freeman testified that it was to compensate him for his work on initiatives. But that aside, when he sent this email, he had an expectation. And that's what makes him a committee. Committees must register. There's the statute there. It's not terribly interesting. It just says that it must register. I will tell you, based on the statute, you probably saw, well, you found a number of days late that this registration is. It's some big numbers. I'll talk about it in a minute. It's a couple thousand days late, his registration. Just so you have it in your head, that number was calculated from 2 weeks after, because the statute requires within 2 weeks. It is calculated from 2 weeks after he got the first check, that he put the first check into the bank that made up that 766. So the day of the deposit of that 766, 14 days later. So there's no question as of that day, he had an expectation of receiving contributions. So that's what the day count comes from, is that day. This talks about reporting. You have to report contributions and expenditures. So we're back to this again. So when Your Honor found that he was a committee back in February of last year, you also found that there were 110 reports missing for the months in which he got those contributions. So there are 110, and then there are 14 more here that were not included. That's where we get to the 124 number. So that is all of the state's claims. And now we turn to penalties and damages. RCW 4217A750, that's the penalties and damages section. And all of the penalties that the state is seeking, the base penalties, are based on these three sections, C, E, and G. And so they're there for your reference. You can look at them later, or you can look at them now, but they're there. So the state went through and tried to fairly calculate how much the state could ask for these violations. And so we looked at various ways, and like I said earlier, like the money coming out from the $71,000 going in, and there was another 110 going out. We didn't even count that. So we tried to be as fair as possible in the calculation. And these are potential damages. And I'll tell you, spoiler alert, we're not asking for this much. It's a huge number, and we're not asking for this much. But this is calculating just a base penalty that's possible under the law. And we encourage you to look at the possible.
May I interrupt with a question? I can't read the screen the counsel's pointing at, so maybe if he references a number, maybe he can just say what that number is for me.
I'd be happy to. So these are possible penalties under the law, which Your Honor can consider in coming up with whether or not the penalty that the state is actually seeking is a reasonable amount. The first one up here is the I-1185 campaign. And the I-1185 campaign, Defendant Eyman directed his committee, Voters Want More Choices, to send 2 checks to Citizen Solutions to fund his kickback. So they sent lots of checks over to campaign, but 2 of them were after the signatures were already paid for. And so those 2 checks were both violations. The statute allows a maximum penalty of $10,000 per violation, so 2 penalties is $20,000. The next penalty amount is the $308,000 to him. So that's $308,000, which was reported to the PDC as payments for signatures, but was actually for payment to Defendant Eyman. So the statute allows for the amount not disclosed as required, which it was not. So that's $308,000. The next one is for checks that were sent to citizens in charge to pay for 517 signatures, the loan checks. There were 4 checks, so that's 4 separate violations. Well, there were 3 checks and a wire transfer, but 4 payments that added up to the $200,000. Each payment, maximum penalty is $10,000 times 4 is $40,000. This next number down here, penalty equal to the amount not disclosed as required. Again, the 182,806 is the amount that was loaned to the 517 campaign. And Your Honor, I'm going to go through this. I want to make sure that you understand, but I will tell you that all of these numbers are in the state's proposed findings of fact and conclusions of law, so that you can see how we laid it out. This last number down here, concealment of contributions. So this is the compensation fund. These are the checks coming in. There were 58 months between the months that Your Honor already found should have been reported, like that money coming in should have been reported. There were 58, and there were 3 more for the $71,000 that the state put on. So a total of 58 months for $580,000 at a $10,000 per penalty. I see these numbers are inconsistent, but the 58 number is correct, and it's in the findings of fact. Next, the penalty equal to the amount not disclosed is required, 837,502. That's the 766 plus the 701. Failure to register as a political committee, as a single violation, didn't register once, so it's a $10,000 maximum penalty. And as of the first day of trial, which was back in November, it was 2,975 days late at a $10 a day maximum penalty. The 124 C3 and C4 reports that were missing. Like I said, you already found 110 of them were wrongfully withheld, and we put on evidence of 14 more. So again, that's the 124, which puts the maximum penalty at 10,000 per violation, 1.24. So those dates, so report number 1 of 124 was due in 2012. So it's 8 years late. And report number 2 was also in 2012. So you can see how these dates stack up because each one of them is late. And if you stack up all those dates, they are a total of 212,491 days late, which allows for a maximum penalty of $2.1 million at $10 a day. The data bar refund, which was not disclosed as required, total amount $23,000. The data bar refund happened in a month that there should have been a report anyway, so we didn't double count it. And then finally, the contributions that came back to pay off the 517 loan total $103,000. Again, the maximum amount is the amount not disclosed. So that leads to a maximum base penalty of about $5.5 million. That's the base penalty that could be assessed here. So these numbers, the actual numbers, and again, well, it is not perfectly clear in the findings of fact and conclusions of law, but which numbers are actually being sought. But I could provide the next slide to you later, or but the numbers that are being actually sought by the state, the $308,000 from the I-1185 campaign, that's the amount not disclosed as required. $182,000 that was sent to the 517 campaign, again, the amount not disclosed as required. And you'll notice that we're not asking for the 103 coming back. So we were not seeking to double recover, though the statute allows for it. The $837,502, those are the checks that he's gotten from various donors. That, again, is the amount not reported as required. That $10,000 per report for the 124 reports and 1 failure to file a statement of organization for a total of 1.25. And the $23,000 from the data bar refund for a total base penalty of $2.6 million. So that's a big number. $2.6 million is a big number. No question about it. And I anticipate a defense of what difference does it make? Like, why such a big number? Why $2.6 million for what's a reporting violation? So defendant Eyman did take some money that did not belong to him, but the vast majority of the money that we're talking about here, he would have been entitled to if he had just reported it. So why should he have to pay $2.6 million for a reporting violation? And I'll tell you why with this one check. This is Exhibit 659. You remember Sid Maieto. Sid Maieto came in and testified. He sat on the stand, and Mr. Maieto told you that he wrote this check for $147. And if you look in the memo, he wrote, "What I can afford." And I asked him, why are you giving money to defendant Eyman? Why are you sending him this money? And he said, I have kids and I know what it's like to have to tell them no. He sent this $147, which was all he could afford, because he didn't want defendant Eyman's kids to go without. Now, What Mr. Maeda didn't know when he wrote this $147 check, that was all he could afford, was that defendant Eyman is a wealthy person. He lives in $1 million house on a golf course and rakes in tens of thousands of dollars each month from people who are sending him checks that are what they can afford, so that his kids won't go without. Maybe Mr. Maeda, if he had known how wealthy defendant Eyman is, would have sent this check anyway, and maybe he wouldn't have. But he has a statutory right to know. He has a statutory right to know how much money defendant Eyman is raking in for his political campaigns when he's making the decision, does he need this $147 more, or do I? And he was deprived of that right, along with thousands of other people who sent what they can afford, because defendant Eyman refuses to comply with the law. And why doesn't he? He told you why in an email. If I tell them that we have a surplus, they will have no incentive to give. If I tell the Sin Maedos of the world that I live in $1 million house on a golf course, and in a good month I'm bringing in $50,000 or $60,000 in donations, he will have less incentive to send it. That's why it matters. The reporting violations are hiding how much money he has and tricking people into sending him money so that his kids, who live in $1 million house, will not go without. Do you think that somebody writing a check for what they can afford would like to know before they wrote that check that he was getting paid by his committee, he was getting paid a kickback, and he was getting paid $150,000? Would they want that information before they made their decision? Would they want to know that he made $308,000 in a single day before they wrote a check for what they could afford? Would they want to know that he made $44,000 in September from checks from people who were writing checks for what they could afford? And those people who are worried about his kids going without, before they wrote that check, would they want to know that he is having his business associates launder money through his own children at $13,000 a pop and taking the money from them without their ever knowing they were in on the scam? Would they want to know? Of course they would. And of course he doesn't want them to know, because it's easy enough to file a C3 or a C4. He does it on purpose so that he can trick people into sending him money. $2.6 million would be a gift. $2.6 million is the base penalty. $2.6 million is the amount, well, it is well under the amount that the statute allows for under all circumstances. This is the standard number. It's not enough. It's not a big enough number to fix this problem. So the $2.6 million, I laid it out for you. We didn't make those numbers up. It's not like a general damages award where we came in and said, 2.6 million, that's the number. That $2.6 million is reached quantitatively. The reason why it is so big is because the misbehavior was so big. The reason why it is so severe is because the wrongdoing was so severe. If defendant Eyman had not scammed a few fewer people, if he had filed a couple more reports, that number would have been smaller. We didn't make it up. That's what's in the statute. Problem is, the statute is the standard number. These are the numbers that we look at generally. This is the GMA case. that this court, different judge, but this court awarded $18 million against the GMA, against GMA. And just last month, the Court of Appeals affirmed that $18 million award, that trebling of $6 million. GMA was not scheming for 20 years. GMA was not stealing money from people who were writing a check for all they could afford. GMA just didn't report money coming from big corporations. And still, their penalty was trebled. If this case is not one for trebling, there isn't one for trebling. Because that 2.6 million, that's the base penalty. It doesn't take into account intent. And that's what the statute calls for. If you did it on purpose, you can get treble damages. That's punitive. The 2.6, that's just how much he concealed. The trebling comes from intent, and it is punitive. Now, the statute does not require trebling. Whether or not you decide to treble the number, a finding of intent is necessary here. There could not be a more clear case of intentional violations of the FCPA. But the trebling is necessary. The trebling is necessary to show the gravity of the wrongdoing in this case. State assumes that you will want to talk about attorney's fees on another day as the prevailing party is entitled to attorney's fees. I'm also assuming that you'd want to talk about injunctive relief on another day. The actual terms of injunctive relief is probably better for a motion, but I can talk about it if you want me to.
I'd like to hear your argument.
About why injunctive relief or what the terms should be?
Both.
Okay. So you will see in the findings of fact and conclusions of law that the state has laid out a template, proposed language for an injunction. Defendant Eyman got an injunction against him back in 2002, and that injunction was worthless. It actually maybe made things worse. So back in 2002, a judge told defendant Eyman, you can't write checks for campaigns, and you can't be a treasurer anymore. And he said, great, I just won't write my name on a statement of organization because I won't even file one. Problem solved. I'll just have people send the money straight to me. So he avoided the injunction by just ignoring the law completely. And as far as the payments that are coming in, I can't write checks on the campaign's checkbook. I'll just lie to my partners about where the money's going and tell them to write the checks. I'll just launder it through other people. So that injunction did not work. We have laid out 20 years of violations here over and over and over again. And something, a robust, strong injunction is necessary to address the wrongdoing here and to make sure that it doesn't happen again. So I have the language here. I don't know if you want to follow along. It's is largely in the findings of fact and conclusions of law. The beginning with respect to fundraising activity, strong controls have to be put on his fundraising activity. That's the biggest problem, is that people are sending him checks. And you'll see, I think it is the second one here, these are kind of grouped together in money that's coming into him. With respect to fundraising activities, there's been a lot of talk about what is he supposed to do? Every time he gets a check, he reports it, and then every time he goes to Safeway to buy groceries, he has to report it again. No, the PDC told him 19 years ago, what he should do if he wants to raise money for himself. It is form a PAC, have the PAC paid, report all those contributions, including the portions of the contributions that are going to you. It told him exactly what to do. And if he did that, if he had done it back in 2001, he wouldn't have made as much money because people would have known how much money he was making. But if he had done it back then, he wouldn't be here. All he has to do is form a PAC. Now, of course, that means hiring a treasurer, because he can't be a treasurer because he's been doing this forever and he's already gotten in trouble for it twice before. There are 2 judgments against him already. I didn't talk about, but you are aware because you signed it, the tougher to raise taxes judgment as well. So this whole, how's he supposed to write down his grocery bill? He doesn't have to write down his grocery bill. He needs to form a PAC. Now he's going to have to get a treasurer, and he's going to have to hire somebody to do it. Maybe he can get a supporter to do it. He's got people to do it for him in the past, but he needs to hire a treasurer. But this treasurer, and you'll see in the language here, can't be a patsy. It just can't be somebody who just does whatever. The treasurer has to be the decision maker, and that language is included in the proposed injunction that the treasurer is the decision maker. The treasurer is making a decision on whether or not he gets the money. So if people want to give to his PAC, knowing that his treasurer gets a decision of whether or not they're going to pass it on, then so be it. But there has to be a gatekeeper. He cannot be trusted. Clearly cannot be trusted. If he does get money for whatever reason, he needs to report it. Like, if people are giving him money, they should do it through a PAC. But if they don't, if they give it right to him, he needs to report it. And then he's stuck in that same spot. So if people want to give him money, and we put in a couple exceptions, legal defense, which is not reportable, and the other exception was payments, if he gets a job. Right, he goes out and gets a 9 to 5, he doesn't have to report that. So we put a specific exception in there. But it's got to be a W-2 employer. It can't be a contract job, because we know about his contract jobs that he never goes to. He gets paid up front and he never goes. So no contract jobs, it's got to be a W-2 employer. So this next section talks about how he would be permanently enjoined from managing, controlling, negotiating, or directing financial transactions of any kind for a committee. That has to be the case, because when he couldn't be the treasurer anymore, he just didn't tell the treasurer what he was doing. So his decision-making in agreeing to pay $5.50 a signature, $4 more than Citizen Solutions ever made again, that can't be in his hands. That has to be somebody else's decision. He clearly cannot be trusted. It has to be made clear in statements of organizations that he can't act as a treasurer, and whether or not he actually is a treasurer. And clearly, he was barred from being a treasurer, so he got a patsy, lied to him, and acted like a treasurer. You saw the whole exchange. Don't tell anybody about the money coming in, only tell them about the money going out. And hold on to this filing until later, until we get more money in. He's acting like a treasurer. Those are decision making, and that just can't be allowed, because he clearly will abuse it. And this last paragraph, not having the authority or responsibility for approving disclosures, again, that's exactly what he was doing, was controlling the disclosures as they were going out. That has to be somebody else's job. He can't be authorized or he can't be disclosed in a statement of organization as a person who can authorize expenditures. That's easy enough. I'll just have to write in the disclosure, he's not authorized to approve expenditures, and it solves the overpayment problem or the $23,000 refund problem. This next paragraph is just stronger language about keeping control over banking accounts, so that he can't just move money around. That's what the permanent offense was about to begin with. He was just taking money and saying it was for refunding for expenditures. The next is he can't take the money himself. So we know he got a $9,900 cash payment from Roy Rufino one day. We know they passed a hat for him, or probably passed a hat for him when he went to Eastern Washington. That money can't go into his hands because he'll just put it in his pocket. We know that, one, because he's been doing it, but two, we found checks in his personal checking account that were made out to Save the Two-Thirds Committee. We found 4 different checks where he just took the check and put it in his account. It wasn't even made out to him. And for some reason, the bank accepted it and deposited it, but he just can't take contributions. He should not have money in his hands. That's not his. Again, can't buying political committees with respect to expenditures. This is the same thing. Agreeing to pay $5.50 a signature is ridiculous. Accepting payments from his personal funds, shall not have any financial decision-making authority for any political committee. Again, he can't make the decisions on whether spending money on. He can go out and promote initiatives. He can go out and raise money for his committees. He can meet with whoever he wants. He just can't have the decision-making power. That's where things get sticky, where his fingers get sticky. He should just not have decision-making power. It doesn't limit him from any speech, any gathering with other people, any work with other people, other than he can't make the decisions on spending other people's money. This has been a concern. This first paragraph is about not participating in the decision-making and transferring funds from one political committee to another. That is largely what happened in the 517. Like, he took his own money and spent it, but it came from one campaign to another. We're just trying to get out in front of it. This goes to exactly what I was talking about. If he's going to have people just sending checks to the House, he needs to have a committee. He just has to have a committee. He can't go out and solicit funds if he doesn't have a political committee to himself. So he can't send out mailers, that kind of stuff, unless he's got a committee that the money can be sent to rather than just to him to make sure that it's getting reported. If he loans money to a political committee, the loan must be in writing and signed. This is the 517 situation. It's got to be signed by both sides. There's got to be some documentation of if this was a loan for this purpose or that purpose. And the last one, shall not direct or solicit payments from contributions directly to campaign. This is what happened in I-1185. So in I-1185, he was having donors give money straight to Citizen Solutions rather than to Voters Want More Choices to send it on. And in one case, it was about $24,000 or $25,000. It was never reported. He forgot to tell Voters Want More Choices about it. So it didn't get reported at all. One of the contributions that came in at the end of the campaign, actually one of the contributions that funded the $308,000, was never reported by anybody because he forgot to tell Voters Want More Choices that the payment was made. That covers the injunction, and I'll be talking to you again for rebuttal.
Thank you. Before the court invites Mr. Sanders to make closing arguments on behalf of his client, the court is going to take a morning recess for 20 minutes. I'll advise the parties and the public that court will be in session only until noon today, because there is something else that I have to do between 1 and 5. So assuming the court does not hear from, assuming that the parties have not concluded closing arguments and including rebuttal, we will reconvene on another date that is convenient to both parties and the court, just as a heads up. So we're in recess for 20 minutes. Thank you.
All rise.
No. I'm assuming Nancy can't do it tomorrow.
Yeah, you said.
You have to come back.
And I saw the thing, because I knew what this was for the announcement. The reason I couldn't find the thing is because we don't have it. I figured it on my picture, I'll look it up, or think about it on the phone. Because then she was getting together, and she's like, "Ah, I think I have it in my bag." So, I'm so sorry about that.
Oh, no worries.
I
We're
felt
definitely
awful.
the way
Okay,
things are.
good.
So I'm not easily able to stop the live stream, I just want you to know that it is still going.
Okay.
I'm just thank you.
Are you done with all of it, do you think, or do you want to keep it up just in case?
Let's leave it. No, I'm done.
Are you sure?
Yeah, you can do that.
Okay, because I don't
Yeah,
need
I
it.
don't
I
have
mean,
any
if you're gonna,
slides.
you're gonna go back up?
Hey.
Just gonna say thank you, since you're here, I'll just tell you.
Is this verbally thank
They
you?
said orally, oh.
An oral thank you, I
So
appreciate
this
that.
is.
It's not
Which
management.
to consume states. Listening. So we take a break and check.
I think, are you trial confirmations in
Sophia, while we'll figure that
202?
one out, I'll look for confirmations, yeah.
Confirmations in 202, omnibus 203.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome. Okay. I know, right? I'm like traffic director.
But Richard is not available right this second.
From 1 to 5 today, so. Is it now? Almost 2 hours.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, the audio.
Yeah.
Change your initials back when you get back.
I got out, obviously, just saying. Yeah.
When you go to log back in. You're not gonna do work on your mind, came
I've
up.
changed.
No, Steve, that's not how it works.
Just blow out like that.
Stay out.
It's, yeah, yeah.
And then it goes back.
Stay out.
Bree and Jeff, don't let them know because I'm like, I asked her.
The first one, the second one was of him.
But the other, did he put another one?
Well, there's 2 photos on there.
Yeah, but we were setting up on that one, the panoramic one. Or hold on.
Oh, maybe just setting up. I can't tell. I
Yeah,
thought
that
he was
one's
talking.
for setting up,
Oh, okay.
but it, so it wasn't a session yet, but still, but why? During session,
Yeah. You think he was recording or not?
I can't tell. Just kept his camera on so he could take pictures.
Yeah.
But he was taking
Yeah.
like tons.
We're in different groups. Yeah. During hearing. Yeah. Yeah, I saw that. He disseminated it to 4 different groups. During. Yeah.
Oh, he did? See, that's not okay.
Yeah, it's only the issue is whether the photos are. I thought it was Eric that mentioned it, but it looks like the photos were taken before they.
Yeah, but the other ones he didn't post.
Yeah.
Were during. He still should.
No, you have to ask permission.
Yeah, so he's got.
Yeah.
He's like
And
silly, completely. He was trying to.
No.
Okay, so here's the status with our first. It's going to be closing argument of the state was an hour and 40 minutes. The judge said we have to adjourn. So, doesn't finish his case, and the state. Then they're going to come back on another day. He didn't say he'd come back to Fridays or stay near the end, just because that's right. So, and then I'll go to the office and we'll sort things out. I don't have any, this in mind, has anything developed over the last couple of hours? See how far Sanders goes. Theoretically, he'll be done before noon, but they won't stop. It's sort of that hybrid. Okay, so I'll record it, and now, I think it's great, Joey and I got a good rapport. Just planning. Yourself or someone who sticks up until 8:30. Let us close it out. Concerned developments, sorry. Anyway, I don't want to, so, too much carbon dioxide, I think, really. Your got assistant attorney general didn't talk for an hour 40. Oh, sorry, Eric. I want to be fresh. I mean, I think don't start me here. I'm gonna just start me. Anyway, and then with Joe, triple check with him. He expects any Monday blues on COVID. You know, anything. This is one of those things where things go south. I've already said the time, just say. Can you go get some water?
Yes. I'll just sit here, how about that? Just chilling.
No, I mean, I'll ask So, that is something, potential direction. It's off the record. It won't be. Yeah, the chair of the one coalition, or chair of the other, and you're right. Anyway, I will hang up on that, we'll check in again. Thank you. I could go ask them how long your rebuttal is, if it's gonna be an hour long.
Went an hour and 48.
What's that?
Went an hour and 48. 1 hour and
Oh,
48.
yeah. Yeah, that's pretty
So,
close.
yeah.
Because I hadn't
You
planned.
beefed up some of it now.
Well, I hadn't
20
planned on
minutes.
injunction points.
Yeah, yeah, that's true.
I will leave it again shortly.
Do you want this clippy thing?
Right next to where you were.
Yeah,
You could feel that was really convenient. You didn't have to walk all over the place. Pretty possible. Yeah. That's good. I know Paul's on there.
All rise. Court is in session.
Be seated, thank you. We'll hear closing argument from, pardon me, Mr. Newman?
Your Honor, this is an ongoing problem, and it's come to my attention that Defendant Eyman is once again taking pictures in the courtroom during the trial. Perhaps you could take that into account in making decisions on how well it follows the court's instructions.
Thank you. Mr. Eyman?
Your Honor, I wasn't recording anything, but I thought photographs were acceptable. It's my fault if it wasn't the case.
I'll accept your apology. Court rule does not allow photography, still or video in the courtroom.
Oh.
The court will hear closing arguments from Mr. Sanders on behalf of his client, Mr. Eyman. Mr. Sanders?
Thank you very much, Your Honor. It seems to me that although this case has a lot of documents, exhibits, depositions, several days of testimony, that the really important facts from the standpoint of the defense are not really disputed or contested. One deficiency I saw in the argument from the state is adequate discussion of the statute. The statute, and only the statute in the constitutional context, controls the disposition of this case. Therefore, it's important to recognize exactly what the statute says, and perhaps more importantly, what the statute doesn't say, and to understand the statutory scheme. Now, there are two essential fact patterns in this case associated with the state's claim. The first is reporting requirements pertaining to I-1185 and I-517 occurring in 2012. The other important aspect of the case is the claim that Mr. Eyman is a continuing political committee because he solicited gifts from friends to pay his personal and family expenses. That's the second subject matter. So in that regard, I will also want to discuss this court's September 13th, 2019 order for non-monetary relief, which was the sole basis of the court's partial summary judgment, characterizing Mr. Eyman as a continuing political committee, and also ruling that he received contributions as a continuing political committee in the amount of $766,000 over the course of 6 or 7 years. Finally, I think it's helpful to recognize that the propriety of all of Mr. Eyman's activities over the last 20 years is not really an issue in this case. It is whether he did something during the course of the statute of limitations that would be after March of 2012, which violated the statute. That's the only issue. And depending on the court's resolution of that issue, then I think we have to consider whether the statute as applied is unconstitutional. But the statute, nevertheless, is the guiding light of this proceeding, and we should focus our attention on that. As to the first general subject, let's discuss I-1185. And I don't think we can discuss that without discussing the duties of the treasurer, Mr. Stan Long. There's no dispute that a political committee by that name was properly filed and formed by the treasurer, Stan Long. There is no dispute that the officers of that committee were Mr. Eyman as well as Mike and Jack Fagan. There's no dispute that Treasurer Stan Long was a highly qualified individual. He was a lawyer, a CPA, a former IRS agent. I would say that no one could be better qualified to serve the role as a treasurer. There's no proof in this proceeding that there was ever a complaint against Mr. Long, and indeed he has unblemished expertise and integrity on this record. So the sole duty to report under the statute is that of the treasurer. And whether you, and however you characterize the treasurer, that doesn't change the statute. RCW 42-17A-210 requires a treasurer to be appointed as really the first step in organizing a political campaign or a political committee. The Section 220 provides the treasurer must deposit contributions in a designated account, and only the treasurer. Section 235 says the treasurer must file all required reports in a timely fashion. A treasurer must certify all reports are true and correct. A treasurer must disclose each loan to be made to the committee with the name and address of the lender. There's no requirement, in fact, it's not provided for in the statute at all, that loans made to other than the political committee need be disclosed. There's no requirement in the statute that the source of the funds to the lender need be disclosed. The statute is predominantly only a reporting statute. It allows the treasurer to file these reports, and ironically, evidence in this case shows Mr. Eyman's attempts to file an amended report regarding the data bar incident was rebuffed by the PDC precisely because Mr. Eyman was not a treasurer. Evidence in the case shows that the PDC has in the past commenced actions, enforcement actions against various treasurers of various campaigns. For example, in 2002, the PDC started an action against Suzanne Kerr, who was associated with Mr. Eyman's campaigns at that time, and eventually got a judgment against her. The same thing happened in 2017 against Barbara Smith. I'm not quite sure how that turned out, but certainly the PDC was attempting to hold Barbara Smith accountable as a treasurer for some reporting error. So the duties of the treasurer are the same, whether they're ministerial or not. The statute doesn't make a distinction there. And Barbara Smith is an example of a ministerial treasurer who was on the receiving end of an enforcement action by the PDC. So, of course, a fundamental basic fact, not contested, is that Mr. Eyman was not a treasurer for any of these campaigns. And in fact, he had no legal ability to become a treasurer because the state had obtained a judgment against him being a treasurer or acting as a treasurer. So the first legal point is this. Mr. Eyman has no duty to report anything and is legally prohibited from reporting anything. Therefore, he cannot be liable if something was misreported by the treasurer. Having said that, however, Your Honor, we're not trying to blame anything on Mr. Long. We think Mr. Long did a perfect job in acting as a treasurer for the two campaigns at issue, that is 1185 and 517. Exhibit 145 are the reports actually filed in the 1185 campaign. These reports were signed by Stan Long. C1PC form is the registration of the committee, which is proper in form and timely filed. Form C4 is the summary full report of receipts and expenses, which was timely and properly filed by Stan Long. Schedule A to that detailed cash receipts and expenditures was timely and properly filed by Treasurer Long. Schedule L lists, and I quote, the lender's name and address, close quote, as Tim Eyman due to a loan Mr. Eyman made to a previous or a predecessor campaign. Under the statute, you can roll over these loans to a replacement campaign. That reference is illustrative of another issue in this case, and that is that Tim Eyman was listed as the lender. There's no place to list how the lender got the money that he loaned to the committee. And as a matter of fact, it's not listed, but it is true that Mr. Eyman borrowed the money. And that was a perfectly legitimate way of reporting the transaction. Schedule C3 asks for monetary contributions. That was promptly filed by Mr. Long as well, and is accurate in every detail. Generally speaking, these forms were to be filed every month over and over again, and they were filed in a timely manner. I believe the rule is that it's sometime they're to be filed sometime after the first of the month with a deadline of the mid-month, but it's up to the committee when they actually want to file the report during that time frame. On April 2nd, 2012, Mr. Long filed an amended registration to change the name to Save the 2/3. This was all proper. So the bottom line here is that these reports were accurate and timely filed by the treasurer. So we're talking about a signature gathering vendor. There were other vendors as well. All payments to the to Citizen Solutions were reported in these filings. They were accurate and they were properly dated. The claim is by the government, I think, that how Citizen Solutions spent its money is somehow reportable, but that is not supported by the statute. The campaign committee reports expenditures to Citizen Solutions, but does not report how Citizen Solutions spends its money. And by the same token, there is no obligation on Citizen Solutions to report how it spends its money either. So whether or not that's a good idea, I don't know, but it's a question to be addressed to the legislature. And it is a question that has already been answered for the purpose of this lawsuit, the court, myself, and it should be answered in that way by the Attorney General as well. Unlike a candidate for political office who is required by law to file a Form F1 pursuant to Section 70710 of the statute, no statute requires an officer of a ballot measure committee report his personal financial transactions. So there's a difference there. And there's a reason for the difference. The statute requires only campaign receipts and expenditures be reported by the ballot measure committee, but has a much broader personal financial reporting requirement when it comes to a candidate for public office or one that occupies public office. There's a reason for this. A successful candidate will continue in office and may be corrupted by past or future financial dealings. That's the theory why it has to be reported. However, a ballot measure is a single statutory enactment, the enforcement of which, or the application of which, is not subject to any influence or control by the persons who proposed or promoted the ballot measure. Hence, there is no reason why the public should require those individuals to file a financial disclosure report about their own personal finances. And I think that this is a distinction which is important to understand what's in the statute, what's not, and what's, more importantly, for our purposes, not in the statute. Now, the state has come up with a 20-year conspiracy theory involving multiple individuals, some of whom were not even parties to this case, a conspiracy to somehow divert money to Mr. Eyman under the table and to defeat the purpose of the political committee. The linchpin of that theory appears to be that the 1185 committee inflated money paid to Citizen Solutions to gather signatures to allow a kickback to Tim Eyman, which was not reported. So the state's claim, in my view, has two problems. First, the statute does not prohibit the alleged conduct, nor require its reporting. And second, the state has not proven the alleged fact that any payment to Citizen Solutions for signature was inflated. All right. First, the statute. The statute does not regulate what a political committee may pay its vendors, a vendor including a signature gathering firm or otherwise, only that it reported. Nor does the statute regulate what transactions may transpire between a committee officer and a vendor, nor does it require that that be reported. So if everything occurred exactly as the state claims, it would not violate the statute. The statute simply doesn't regulate the relationship between a committee officer and a vendor. The statute must be clear for guidance to all campaign treasurers. If it is not clear, if it is ambiguous, if it is subject to various interpretations, it fails as a unconstitutional, vague statute. It has penalties. And this vagueness doctrine, I'll discuss it more later, but it was referenced in the leading case, Buckley versus Vallejo. The statute must require in unambiguous terms what must be reported, i.e. campaign contributions and expenditures, and what not need be reported and cannot be reported, e.g. transactions between committee officers or vendors. Nor do the facts support the state's theory that the prices were inflated. No facts, let alone a preponderance of evidence, support the proposition that the price paid to Citizen Solutions was, one, inflated, or two, that it was based on a possible future consulting agreement between Watchdog and Citizen Solutions. In the pretrial proceedings, by the way, Your Honor, your image has disappeared from my screen. I don't know if that's important or not. The state, in pretrial proceedings, the state claimed the fair market value of signature gathering in this instance is not relevant to its theory, and actively sought and obtained an order in limine preventing Mr. Eyman, my client, from introducing evidence to the effect that these prices were at fair market value. Therefore, I think it is a fair inference that Citizen Solutions was paid a fair market price. So their theory of liability must go elsewhere. If it's the state's theory that the two negotiated price per signature bumps late in the campaign were accomplished to line Mr. Eyman's pocket, the facts not only don't prove it, but disprove it without contradiction. The evidence regarding these two price bumps, one for 50 cents, one for $1.50, includes emails, testimony from Mr. Eyman, and deposition testimony from Mr. William Agazarm, and all of that testimony is uncontradicted in the record. As to the emails, several emails discuss a proposed 50-cent increase to the price paid for signature gathering. Exhibit 502, also Exhibit 82, is an email from Eddie Agazarm, dated May 15th, 2012, to Mr. Eyman, suggesting and justifying a 50% increase due to market conditions. The concern raised in the email is that unless the price paid per signature gatherer was bumped up by 50 cents, there was the prospect that they might not be able to get the sufficient signatures to qualify the measure for the ballot. This price bump was not justified in any document or by any testimony in this case to pay Mr. Eyman any more money than he would otherwise be paid. Exhibit 504 includes an email from William Agazarm to Mr. Eyman, dated also May 15, 2012, which was fully and voluntarily disclosed to the PDC, which also justified a 50 cent price bump by market conditions, and stating, quote, "And just so you know, we won't make anything from the bump. All of the extra will go to the coordinators and petitioners to get I-1185 over the finish line," close quote. Nothing in the record contradicts any of this, and this was forwarded to Mr. Greg Hannon as well in the interest of full disclosure. And I'd refer the court to Exhibit 529. Exhibit 503 is an email from Eddie Agazarm to Mr. Eyman saying an additional $1.50 was needed due to I-1240, that is this Charter Schools Initiative campaign, paying signature gatherers double what 1185 was paying. This fact was also forwarded to Mr. Hannon to keep the lobbyist fully informed of the circumstances. Nothing in the record contradicts anything in this email. Paying Mr. Eyman was not a reason for the bump and was never even discussed. The state's only substantive witness on this issue was Tony Perkins, who had no testimony on this subject, nor did he have any opinion on the fair market value or reasonableness of the amounts paid signature gatherers. The state had previously identified an expert to testify on this subject, Angelo Paparello, who was deposed by Mark Lamb, my predecessor lawyer. After the deposition, the state decided not to call Mr. Paparello to testify to inflated payments. The state presented no evidence to support its claim. Probably they didn't call the expert witness because the expert witness's views would not support the state's position.
Objection. Facts not in evidence. There's a discussion on this.
Sustained.
So move to strike.
Motion to strike is granted.
Well, I was arguing that it's an inference, Your Honor. That's...
Understood.
Mr. Eyman testified that the only reason to bump the price was for market considerations and was unrelated to a subsequent consulting agreement with Citizens Solutions. He testified in open court after submitting to a lengthy deposition and multiple statements under oath. He was available for the state's cross-examination. I do not recall any effort to impeach Mr. Eyman on this particular subject. The other witness offering testimony through a deposition was William Agazarm. In his November 27th, 2018 deposition, pages 53 to 55, that the $308,000 payment for the consulting agreement had nothing to do with 1185 payments to Citizens Solutions, but was to secure future work for Watchdog over the next 3 years to solicit new business for Citizens Solutions. So in order for the conspiracy theory to fly, I think that there is a chain or that there is a link missing in the chain of evidence, and that is showing a substantial relationship to the price bumps and to the payment to Mr. Eyman. Now, there's a number of, not only do the witnesses testify contrary to that view, the state has presented no evidence in support of that view, but the additional revenue received from the price bumps does not come anywhere close to the $308,000, which was the subject of the consulting agreement. Citizen Solutions stated all additional revenue from the price bumps went to signature gatherers, and 2, that additional revenue from the price bumps was not $308,000 or anything close. Recall, 50% increase in mid-May per signature for 200,000 signatures, which was the estimate, equals $100,000. Later, in the course of the campaign, the signature price was bumped by another $1.50 for the last signatures, approximately 40,000 signatures, and that equals $60,000. Therefore, the price bump netted, in the sense, or grossed, I would say, Citizen Solutions $160,000, nowhere close to the $308,000 contract payment to Watchdog, which was subsequently negotiated. Now, the consulting agreement between Watchdog and Citizen Solutions was not reportable under the Fair Campaign Practices Act by the 1185 committee, Treasurer Stan Long, although there was no reason for it not to be disclosed if it was required by the statute. But it simply wasn't. There is no provision in the statute which requires the reporting of a vendor transaction of how a vendor spends its money by the campaign which contracted with the vendor. Mr. Eyman had no independent duty to disclose this, although he would have if he had that duty. Mr. Eyman did report this consulting contract to the IRS, and he paid taxes on it. He freely and fully disclosed everything about this transaction to the PDC when asked, as admitted by Tony Perkins during Mr. Perkins' testimony. Mr. Eyman submitted to a statement under oath, which Mr. Perkins said answered all of his questions in this regard. And that statement under oath was taken substantially before Stan Long tragically died in an auto accident, although no one from the PDC attempted to contact Mr. Long to get his version of events. In summary, Your Honor, there is no evidence that, number one, signature gathering prices were inflated, let alone, number two, inflated to pay Mr. Eyman a kickback. But even if they were, this does not violate the statute, nor is it reportable under the statute. This is where we have to look at the statute and read it carefully and realize that the statute doesn't cover everything, especially when it comes to ballot measure campaigns, and that people cannot be held accountable for what the statute does not require. If the court or the Attorney General believes the statute should require this, then the place to go is the legislature and make the case. Next, the loan to citizens in charge did not violate the statute. The facts are that shortly after the receipt of the $308,000 from Citizen Solutions, money that was the property of Citizen Solutions that they had earned as a profit, Watchdog loaned approximately $200,000 to another organization, Citizens in Charge. Mr. Eyman used the rest of that money from Citizen Solutions for his personal expenses. This is not the payment of some of this money for personal expenses does not violate Section 445 because these were not campaign contributions that he received, but were rather funds paid by Watchdog to citizens, funds paid, but rather were funds owned by Citizen Solutions paid to Watchdog. This was Citizen Solutions money, which it had the right to do anything it wanted to and had no reporting requirement. After they paid the money to Watchdog, it became Watchdog's money. This act does not prohibit Citizen Solutions from making a profit, nor does it direct how that profit must be spent, nor does it require a campaign committee or a vendor to report same, period. That's in the statute. Nor does the statute require Watchdog to report its $200,000 loan to citizens in charge. Watchdog is not subject to any reporting requirement. As illustrated by I-1185 filings and forms, only loans to a political committee, not a third person, need be reported by the political committee. Even if one's loans to a political committee needed to be reported, the source of the loan need not be reported, as illustrated by the loan Mr. Eyman made to the predecessor committee to 1185. And this is also uncontradicted in the evidence, as this was in fact a loan with the expectation of repayment, and that over $100,000 of the loan was actually repaid by citizens in charge to Watchdog. So it was a loan. And that's significant because the statute treats loans differently than contributions. Although the specific funds loaned to citizens in charge by Watchdog cannot be specifically traced to in-kind expenditures for the 517 campaign, even if they could be, there is no requirement that a political committee disclose the source of the contribution of a lender, let alone identify the lender. If a loan was made to directly to 517, the lender need be identified, but not the source of the lender's funds. And that was illustrated by the earlier campaign that I talked about. Whether the lender was a commercial or a person does not matter for the purpose of reporting on a ballot measure, although different requirements pertain to candidates who are subject to contributions limits. And that's specified in section 465. So it doesn't matter whether it's a commercial bank, it doesn't matter whether it's Watchdog or some person or something else, it need not be reported. If there were a requirement in the statute, loans to a contributor must be reported. That is, loans to a contributor. Mr. Long would have done so. Mr. Long had full knowledge from Mr. Eyman and Paul Jacob of Citizens in Charge. That was their testimony. I-517 reports are contained in Exhibit 140. They were prepared by Mr. Long. They were timely, full, detailed, and accurate. They disclosed every single in-kind contribution from a citizen in charge and everyone else to promote the I-517 campaign. Mr. Eyman bore no responsibility for these reports because he was not the treasurer. However, Mr. Long's work product cannot be faulted. This is not concealment prohibited by section 435, because this section does not require a political committee to disclose the source of a loan made to a contributor, even if the loan is for the express purpose of funding a contribution. I previously gave the example of the report in 1185 that Tim Eyman made a loan to the predecessor committee with using borrowed money. And it was properly reported by 1185 that the lender was Tim Eyman with no discussion of where he got the money. And that's what the statute requires. All in-kind contributions to the 517 campaign were admittedly improperly reported as in-kind contributions from citizens in charge by Treasurer Stan Long. There's no dispute about this. The statute could have provided otherwise, but the legislature elected not to put that in the statute. The record also shows without dispute that Mr. Stan Long was fully aware of the loan, according to the testimony of Mr. Eyman, that he and Mr. Jacob and Mr. Long had lunch together and talked about all of this. Mr. Jacob testified about the lunch and a man matching the description of Mr. Long. That's in the Jacob deposition of February 3rd, 2020, pages 56 and 57. Mr. Eyman, in his testimony, identified that the individual that Mr. Long had attended that lunch, and that, as Mr. Jacob testified, all of the circumstances regarding the loan were fully discussed at that time. So the state had ample opportunity to interview or depose Mr. Long, but it didn't, perhaps believing that Mr. Long would support Mr. Eyman's version of the events. Once again, Mr. Eyman had no duty or authority to report anything. However, Mr. Long fulfilled his duty under the statute in any event. He reported all contributions to and expenditures from the I-517 campaign in Exhibit 140. It's right there. That's one thing the state never talks about is we have these two exhibits with all the reports actually filed. It never tells us how those reports should have been different by its own theory. Are they saying that payments to citizens in charge should not have been reported, or that in-kind contributions from citizens in charge should not have been reported? If that's its position, that's counterintuitive and appears to be inconsistent with the statute. Apparently, the PDC was predisposed to pursue Mr. Eyman and did not bother to discuss the matter with Mr. Long, who had no interest except to fulfill his reporting duties and was as competent a professional in such matters as anyone can find. The state's reporting claims for 2012 have no basis in fact or law and therefore must be dismissed. The second broad subject matter of the complaint is Mr. Eyman as a continuing political committee. In this area, it is very important that the court read the definitions and other provisions of the statute pertaining to this claim. Unrelated to the above, the state's amended complaint asserts Mr. Eyman is a continuing political committee and did not report, quote, political contributions and expenditures, close quote, subjecting him to civil penalties while leaving the door open for criminal penalties. Briefly, the facts are that Mr. Eyman solicited his friends to provide gifts to his family for living expenses and for legal defense. The state claims the former must be reported, but not the latter. There is no claim by the state that Mr. Eyman expended any of this money on any electoral campaign, nor that he represented that he would. I think that's a critical fact. The money was solicited for personal use and used for personal expenses, and nothing went to electoral campaigns, nothing. Although this is really a legal question of whether an individual seeking funds for his living expenses is properly cast as a, quote, continuing political committee, close quote, it may be important to recall all of Mr. Eyman's solicitations since his bankruptcy in November 2018 had been for legal defense, for the Legal Defense Fund, which is non-reportable under the state's theory. Prior to the bankruptcy, he did solicit contributions for his personal expenses, but since then it's been only for legal expenses. The state's theory that solicitation of gifts to pay personal expenses seems to relate back to Mr. Stutzman's letter of August 13th, 2002, which is Exhibit 177. As made clear in the follow-up letter, which is Exhibit 178, Mr. Stutzman seems to opine donations to Tim as a political activist for his personal expenses must be, quote, political contributions, close quote, because he may promote a ballot measure through his personal efforts, such as speaking, wearing a gorilla suit in the Capitol, getting on TV, etc., even though he never uses the money in an electoral campaign. According to Mr. Stutzman, Kim can have a legal fund, but not a grocery fund. Although the state listed Stutzman as a witness, it did not call him, where he could be cross-examined on his bizarre legal theory.
Objection, improper argument. Mr. Stutzman was equally available to the defense.
Court will overrule the objection. Please continue.
Mr. Perkins was asked about the letter, asked to justify it, and he could not do so. So when counsel says that there's some significance in this letter, I think that the significance is that the state apparently got this theory out of thin air and then spent the next 20 years trying to apply it to Mr. Eyman. But there's no basis for the distinction drawn in the Stutzman letter. In any event, at that time, Mr. Eyman was primarily concerned, had been raising money for legal expenses. He just had a judgment taken against him. And he was not raising money for personal expenses. So the personal expense aspect of it was really not relevant to what Mr. Eyman was endeavoring to do. Now, in point of law, soliciting gifts from friends to support an activist's political advocacy do not make that person a, quote, continuing political committee, close quote, because those contributions are not, and I quote, in support of any ballot measure. And I'm referencing here the definition of a political committee contained in RCW 4217A 005 subpart 40. They are in support not of a ballot measure, they are in support of Tim Eyman. And Mr. Eyman is not a ballot measure as defined by section 005 subpart 4 as, quote, any initiative proposed to be submitted to the voters of the state. Mr. Eyman is not an initiative proposed to the voters of the state. Political contributions are, quote, contributions in any election campaign, close quote. And I'm looking at section 205, parent 1 parent. It's an election campaign. That's what the statute is about. And political advocacy is not an election campaign. If Mr. Eyman wants to advocate that people sign some initiative, that is not an election campaign. That is Mr. Eyman exercising his free speech rights of advocacy. I think that there was further enlightenment on this particular point in the state versus grocery manufacturing case. That is 195 Washington 2nd, 224, paragraph 30. And I quote, as our trial brief quoted, by the FCPA's plain language, the contribution prong does not apply any time an organization receives any funds that could potentially be spent in elections. It applies when an entity has, quote, the expectation of receiving contributions to be spent in elections, close quote. So I think that that just blows the state's theory right out of the room. Because the contributions, the expectation of Mr. Eyman in receiving those contributions was not to have them spent in elections, it was to spend it on himself. So So I think that the state's interpretation of this is off the wall. Now, and I'll admit that none of the funds were, in fact, spent on elections. Under cross-examination, Mr. Perkins was unable to identify any precedent which has ever characterized an individual raising money for his own support as a political committee, much less a continuing political committee, which is the state's claim in this proceeding. A continuing political committee must fulfill the language regarding the expectation of receiving contributions for an electoral campaign, but also it must be an organization, not an individual. That's in section 005, parent 14, post-parent. So I think the claim on the merits that Mr. Eyman is a continuing political committee is far from the mark. And unfortunately, the court based its summary judgment on the court's order for non-monetary relief entered on September 13th, 2019. And we asked that the court revise that order. Now, that order was entered at a time when Mr. Eyman was pro se. He was defenseless. There is a videotape of the proceedings, and it appears that the state, with little argument or debate from Mr. Eyman or interrogation by the court, gave the court an order which the court signed. There was no discussion of the elements of prejudice, for example. There was no discussion of the merits of the legal conclusion that Mr. Eyman could be characterized as a continuing political committee, and I saw no evidence there that these questions were properly litigated before the court or that the court really considered them.
Well, let me stop you there, Mr. Sanders. I want the record to reflect that this court devoted a great deal of time and thought and consideration to the state's motion for entry of an order of non-monetary sanctions. The court received the state's moving papers long in advance of its oral argument. So this was not a decision lightly made by the court, nor was it a decision made without consideration or without forethought. This court reviewed the allegations, the facts, and applied the law and the court rule. So the record should reflect that the decision entered by the court was not simply granting the state's motion without devoting any thought or doing any preparation prior to hearing oral argument on the state's motion. Thank you. Please continue.
Well, Your Honor, as you know, I wasn't there. I wasn't the attorney at the time, and I'm just trying.
I know, but when you say you've looked at a video that, in your opinion or your conclusion, leads you to argue that this court simply just granted the state's motion because there wasn't much argument made from Mr. Eyman or anyone on Mr. Eyman's behalf, that's not accurate.
All right. Thank you, Your Honor, for correcting me there. This trial that was just concluded, I think, sheds some light on that order for non-monetary relief. First, there was no prejudice demonstrated which led to the entry of that order as per the testimony in this trial. Your Honor was, I believe, misled at the time of the order, but now we have a fuller record. And secondly, the court, the state seeks to apply this order beyond its own scope, which pertained to the $766,000. It does not pertain to anything beyond that, which the state wants to parlay into the trial right now. And it, in my view, on its face, the order doesn't control that. For example, in Exhibit 352, the state itemizes all kinds of uh, expenditures, contributions and expenditures, which have nothing whatsoever to do with a ballot measure election.
I apologize, Mr. Sanders. I apologize for interrupting you. The court is now, my mistake. I looked at the clock. It's 12:04. It's afternoon. And I have obligations to other people, including the deputy clerk, the court reporter. So the court's going to interrupt closing arguments now because we're actually past noon. And the court has instructed its judicial assistant to contact the parties this afternoon to procure available and unavailable dates to conclude closing arguments. I can tell the parties that I have time available to me. This court, meaning this judge, has time available next Friday afternoon at the earliest, but I can do it next Friday afternoon. Court thanks the parties. We're in recess. Thank you.
All rise. That's what I heard Friday afternoon. I'm checking the yeah.
I wondered whether.
Is the Zoom call closed? I'm sorry. Is the Zoom call still open or?
There's stuff on the podium. There's papers in there, is that yours?
This is yours, right?
Yeah, I'll take that.
Oh, these papers.
Wait, no. Just make it yours.
Thanks so much for being here.
Oh, you're welcome.
Hopefully we'll see you next week.
Yeah, see you next week.
I'll get back.
Oh, thank you so much. Appreciate it. It is a little bit, yeah.
I mean, not a big deal, but
No, it's not so bad, but it was,
lightweight.
no, I appreciate it. It's awkward.